Hey guys, what is up? Public here, back with another video, and today I want to talk about Unfurling Darkness. So this has been a talent that we've actually had for quite some time in the game, and it's usually just taken as like a Voidweaver talent. I haven't done a whole lot of like talking about like how it works or what it does or how to use it. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to go over, talk a little bit about some of the funky interactions with the spell, and then a little bit of how we use it in the rotation as a Voidweaver. Let's dive in. Alright, so first things first, if you're not sure what Unfurling Darkness is, this is a talent in our spec tree that simply says, after casting Vampiric Touch on a target, your next Vampiric Touch within 8 seconds is instant cast and then deals an upfront bit of instant direct damage to that target. Now this is actually, it goes on cooldown, so you can only do this once every 15 seconds. It is important though that the buff cooldown, basically the way that it works, that cooldown starts as soon as you proc it. So you don't have to wait till like, the cooldown doesn't start until after you consume it, that kind of thing. So you get that CD right away to actually tick down. So that's how it works. And in general, this hasn't really been used inside of like PvE environments as a Shadow Priest since it's been added. I think it was like a Torghast power back in Shadowlands, was shortly added to the talent tree. And generally speaking, it's just been kind of a PvP thing. Although what ends up happening, or what has happened over the last couple patches, they've done direct buffs to like our entire kit, where they say, hey, all of your spells will increase by 13% or whatever it was. And then something new came along, and that is Voidweaver. Voidweaver has a talent called Inner Quietus. And so we'll kind of go in a little bit of like what buffs things and what doesn't. So Inner Quietus is simply Vampiric Touch and Shadow or Pain deal 35% additional damage. Now, with the way that Unfurling Darkness is coded, and you've probably noticed this when you've used it yourself, where the damage doesn't show up on your meter as Unfurling Darkness, it shows up as Vampiric Touch. The same spell ID as the dot tick. And that's just how the game is coded. It uses the same spell ID and just uses the direct damage portion of Vampiric Touch, which is normally 0, and it adds a modifier to that based on the spell power coefficient of the spell. So this makes it really funky, and basically it has interactions that I don't think that are intended, and they've been in the game ever since the spell has kind of come out. So what that means is, though, it's super unclear what buffs it and what doesn't. Inner Quietus is the biggest example of this, where Unfurling Darkness as a Voidweaver just hits for 35% more damage. This modifier makes it quite an appealing talent as Voidweaver in particular, which is why it's not really used outside of Voidweaver. Like Archon builds, it's never really been worth to talk about using this. And the other reasons for that are there are quite a few things that don't actually buff its damage that you might think that would. Unfurling Darkness reads as it's like direct damage, right? Like immediate shadow damage. Unfortunately, Dark Ascension does not buff it, right? So while Dark Ascension is active, Unfurling Darkness doesn't do any more damage. Dark Evangelism does not affect Unfurling Darkness damage. Maddening Touch, which reads that Vampiric Touch deals more damage, does not buff Unfurling Darkness, right? So who knows which of these are bugs or intended or not, but that's just the way the spell works. The other thing that Voidweaver has going into it, in addition to Inner Quietus, is Voidheart. So Voidheart's a very exceptional spell in the sense of the way that it works is quite different than many other things in our kit. This is a shadow damage modifier. And the reason why this is important when you go under the hood and look at spell data, this is simply saying anything that you do that deals shadow damage is buffed. This includes trinkets that deal shadow damage. This includes procs that deal shadow damage. And unlike spells like Dark Ascension, Dark Evangelism, or Maddening Touch, those 3 spells work off of past lists. So basically they have a list of spells that they work with in data, and it doesn't match those, doesn't buff them. This spell is just a global shadow damage modifier, so it's quite unusual that this exists in the game still, because it does have some odd interactions, this being one of them. Voidheart does buff Unfurling Darkness. So while it isn't like advantageous to really cast Unfurling Darkness at like a high priority while Dark Ascension is active, it is buffed by the Rift, so it does make it an okay thing to press while the Rift is active. So if we move into a little bit of like kind of how to play with it, we'll talk a little about how to like when to weave this in, right? Because it is kind of just like a cooldown spell almost. Is you like kind of like imagine Vampiric Touch has a 15-second cooldown. Like that's kind of how this is played. Now, Importantly, the distinction here should be noted on single target versus AoE. To round off what does and does not affect Unfurling Darkness, Psychic Link is not affected with Unfurling Darkness, right? So that instant damage that you're dealing with Unfurling Darkness doesn't get replicated with Psychic Link. So that's pretty important from like a Mythic Plus perspective, just because, you know, you're not using it for big AoE. It's only doing that like priority target, single target damage. And speaking of that damage, you're talking about like in the range of like 3 to 5% single target damage is what this is bringing to the table. Depending on cooldowns and stuff, that's just like an average over like a fight. For Voidweaver, if you don't like playing around with this and it doesn't sound fun to you, you can swap this for Mental Decay and take that hit of damage of like 3 to 5%, like I mentioned, and you pick this up instead, and then you don't have to worry about it. But it is kind of a nice thing to weave in if you're looking for that extra spice in the rotation. And more importantly, I think good Shadow Priest will be able to use this as a what we call like a movement global. Unlike Archon that runs Void Eruption, Voidweaver doesn't have as many instant cast spells that it can use to kind of cast something worth pressing while moving for like a mechanic or something. Unfurling Darkness does kind of give you that. You have that like 8-second window where you can kind of get a guaranteed bit of damage that's good to press. So the biggest way we use this in our kit is when you don't have a whole lot else to press Vampiric Touch, and then you have a movement global that you can use that does a lot of damage over the next 8 seconds. That's like the TLDR with this. To get more specific from like a rotational perspective, you loosely want to prioritize using this over like a base Mind Blast. So not like a buffed Void Blast or anything else like that, but like just a normal Mind Blast outside of cooldowns, you would want to use Unfurling Darkness or cast Vampiric Touch to proc Unfurling Darkness over that. Now, inside of cooldowns, what that really looks like is over like a normal Mind Spike or a normal Mind Flay if you're playing that. So it's pretty low on the totem pole as far as like things that we would want to press, and that's mostly because we have all this other stuff that really isn't buffing it or interacting with it, aside from Void Heart. So in addition to that, once you've actually procced it, you've done the work of the spell at that point, and at that point you typically use it back to back, meaning cast Vampiric Touch to proc it, and then immediately press Vampiric Touch again. That's typically what the sim is doing, although in real life practice, like I mentioned, you should kind of play around with this as a movement global. You have that 8-second window, so generally speaking, what I typically do is I proc this, and you know, kind of going around with the rotation, right? So you get the initial Unfurling Darkness proc, right? And then you have this 8-second buff to wind down. So maybe I'll do some other things in my rotation because I know I have to move in a second. Oh, now I'll hit the Vampiric Touch because I'm now moving, right? So that's the idea with it. You don't have to strictly try to like cast it on cooldown. I have a weak aura inside of my pack that tells me when it's ready. You know, so when I have nothing else to press, that's when I'll cast it. But you really don't have to think about it too hard. It's just something else to press when you don't have other things that are like important to go on with the rotation. And like I said, you don't need to strictly try to like use it on cooldown within the rotation. It's going to kind of get into a rhythm where it should naturally kind of flow in when you just don't have anything else to press. But don't be too bothered by it if it's sitting off cooldown for like 5 or 10 seconds. That's totally normal. So, okay, that is Unfurling Darkness in a nutshell. Again, primarily just a Voidweaver talent, but hopefully this has kind of helped explain how we use it, when it's useful, and that kind of thing. Let me know if you have any questions or if you enjoy playing with Unfurling Darkness. I know, like I said, it's kind of a PvP talent more than anything, but I do think it's kind of interesting, especially like, you know, Mythic Plus, you get that single target damage, or while a pack is grouping up, you get that instant VT damage. I don't know. It's something. Keeps things a little different. So that's all we have for this video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.